Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we explore the profound moments that challenge our perceptions and touch our hearts. Today's story takes you on a gripping journey through the streets of New York, where a millionaire's pursuit of a young girl leads to an unexpected revelation. Stay with us for this emotional roller coaster, one that might just change the way you see the world. The streets of New York City were alive with the hum of 1,000 voices. The relentless rhythm of daily life, carried by hurried footsteps and the constant blare of car horns. The skyline stretched endlessly above, each towering building a testament to the power and ambition that had shaped this city. Amidst the chaos, Nathan Carter strode with purpose, his steps deliberate, the polished soles of his shoes clicking sharply against the pavement. At 45, he had built his empire from nothing, climbing the ranks of the city's cutthroat business world with a ruthless determination that left little room for sentimentality. Dressed in a tailored suit, the fabric of which could have fed a family for a year, Nathan exuded the quiet confidence of a man who had achieved everything he had ever set out to accomplish. His gray hair, prematurely silver from years of stress and sleepless nights, was swept back neatly, and his cold blue eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the street as he moved, barely acknowledging the bustle of the pedestrians around him. To Nathan, the city was a tool, an instrument of his success, a backdrop to the life he had meticulously crafted. He had no time for the lives of the people who lived in the shadows of his skyscrapers, their struggles and worries, their fleeting joys and perpetual heartaches. The world he knew was one of boardrooms, deals, and influence. People like him, people of power, were the architects of the future. The others, the ones who scurried through the streets like ants, were nothing more than a backdrop, a necessary evil in the machinery of his empire. But today, something happened that would rattle that carefully constructed world. As he fumbled in his pocket for his phone, preparing to make a call to his lawyer, a slight bump interrupted his concentration. Instinctively, Nathan's hand shot to his wallet, only to find the leather empty. His pulse quickened. He turned swiftly, his eyes scanning the crowd, and caught a glimpse of a small figure slipping between two people, weaving through the masses with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. "Stop!" Nathan's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. For a moment, there was only the sound of the city, the hum of traffic, the murmur of pedestrians, and the distant clamor of an overhead train. Then the crowd shifted, and Nathan saw the girl, a small, wiry figure, perhaps no more than 11 or 12, darting between the gaps in the crowd. She was quick, moving with a nimbleness that was almost unnatural for someone so young. Nathan, fueled by a blend of fury and disbelief, pushed his way through the throngs of people, his eyes locked on the girl who had dared to take from him. She was fast, but he was faster. His long legs covered the ground with ease, and within moments, he was close, so close that he could almost hear her breath coming in short, frantic gasps. She didn't turn to look back, but Nathan could see her fear in the way her small frame tensed, the frantic movements of her arms as she clutched the stolen wallet to her chest. "Thief!" Nathan shouted again, his voice cutting through the noise of the city. "Stop right there!" But the girl didn't stop. She sprinted harder, slipping into an alleyway that seemed to open up before her like a dark tunnel. Nathan's heart pounded as he pursued her. He pushed past a couple of delivery trucks, shoved aside a stack of cardboard boxes, and was now deep into the narrow streets where the light was dimmer, the air thicker with the scent of garbage and old buildings. The further they went, the more the sounds of the city faded, until all Nathan could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat in his ears and the thundering of his footsteps echoing off the walls of the alley. The girl reached the end of the alley, panting heavily now. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with panic. But she didn't stop. She stumbled on a loose piece of pavement and fell to the ground with a sharp cry of pain. Nathan slowed, his breathing ragged from the chase, and watched as she struggled to get back to her feet. "Got you now," he sneered, advancing on her, his hands tightening into fists. She was crumpled on the ground, her knees scraped and bleeding, her small body trembling. With a final, desperate effort. She clutched the stolen wallet to her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the storm that was Nathan Carter. He towered over her, his shadow casting a long, dark streak across the alley. "Please," she whispered, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I didn't mean to. I just needed the money." Nathan stood still for a moment, looking down at her with a mixture of contempt and disbelief. His lips curled into a smirk as he adjusted his cufflinks, the faint glint of his expensive watch catching the weak light filtering through the alleyway. "Do you even know what you've done?" he asked coldly, taking a step closer. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The girl didn't answer. Instead, she tried to scramble to her feet, but her foot caught on the broken pavement, sending her sprawling again, her body landing in a heap. She gasped, clutching her scraped knees, the torn fabric of her dress catching on the rough surface. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "My mom, she's sick. I just needed money for her medicine." Nathan paused. Something in her voice, a tremor of desperation, stirred something deep within him. He had heard it all before. The sob stories, the excuses, the pleas. But there was something raw in her words, something that felt different, more desperate. He took another step, his icy demeanor momentarily faltering. "Prove it," he said, his voice as cold as ever, but his eyes now fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. "Show me where you live. If you're lying, I'll call the police." The girl looked up at him, her small frame shuddering with fear. But she nodded. "My name's Emma," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. As they walked together through the labyrinth of the city's lesser-known streets, Nathan felt an unfamiliar unease gnawing at him. The towering buildings that once surrounded him had disappeared, replaced by crumbling structures, peeling paint, and the unmistakable stench of decay. His polished shoes clacked against the uneven pavement, an absurd sound in such a place. Emma led him up several flights of creaking stairs in a rundown building. The walls seemed to pulse with the weight of neglect, and the further they went, the darker the halls became. Nathan felt a shift within him, something he couldn't quite place. As they finally stopped in front of a door that looked as though it might collapse under its own weight. With a hesitant push, Emma opened the door to a small apartment. The air inside was heavy, thick with the smell of illness. Nathan hesitated at the threshold. There, on a worn-out couch, lay a frail woman, Emma's mother. He realized her face was pale, and her breathing was shallow, the kind of breathing that spoke of a body too weak to fight anymore. Emma rushed to her side, gently brushing her mother's forehead, whispering soothing words in a language Nathan didn't understand. The scene before him stirred something in Nathan, something he hadn't felt in years. The guilt, the recognition of how far removed he was from this reality, weighed heavily on him. His thoughts, so often consumed by his wealth, his deals, and his business empire, now felt distant and hollow. Emma's mother opened her eyes weakly, meeting Nathan's gaze with a quiet understanding. And in that moment, Nathan realized something that shook him to his core. This wasn't just about a stolen wallet anymore. As the door creaked open, Nathan was met with an unsettling quiet. The room beyond was small, cramped, with bare walls that had seen better days. The faint smell of stale air and unwashed fabric hung in the atmosphere, mixing with the acrid scent of cheap cleaning products. It was a world far removed from the sleek, polished glass and steel of the city he knew, a world that felt foreign and uncomfortable to him. The furniture was sparse and worn, with a threadbare couch pushed up against one wall. A table, scuffed and scratched, stood in the corner, surrounded by mismatched chairs that looked as though they had been collected from thrift stores over the years. In the far corner of the room, an old kitchen stove sat next to a cracked sink, its faucet dripping with a slow, steady rhythm. It was the kind of place that had long given up any hope of being beautiful or even livable. It was just a place to exist, barely. At first, Nathan didn't notice the woman lying on the couch. She was pale, her thin frame draped under a faded blanket, her face drawn with the unmistakable signs of illness. Her shallow breaths rose and fell in a steady, rhythmic pattern. But it was clear she was fighting against something much bigger than her body could handle. Emma rushed to her side, her small hands trembling as she brushed the damp strands of hair from her mother's forehead. "Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm back. I got the money. I got the medicine." Nathan felt a shift in the air, a tightening in his chest that he couldn't explain. The woman, though clearly weak, opened her eyes just slightly, a faint glimmer of recognition flickering in them as she looked up at her daughter. Her gaze was unfocused, as if the effort of simply staying awake was too much to bear. For a moment, Nathan stood frozen in the doorway, watching the scene unfold before him. The mother's feeble smile, the exhaustion in Emma's eyes, the overwhelming sense of love and desperation in the small apartment. It was all too much. In that moment, Nathan realized something he had been blind to for years. There was more to life than just power, wealth, and status. Here, in this dingy little room, was a kind of raw, unfiltered love that he had long forgotten existed. He cleared his throat and stepped inside, his polished shoes sounding oddly loud on the old floorboards. Emma looked up at him, her eyes still wide with apprehension. Her mother, Sarah, shifted slightly on the couch, her hand reaching out weakly toward Emma. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for bringing her back." Nathan's heart tightened. He wasn't sure if it was guilt or something else entirely, but there was no denying the emotional weight of the moment. He had come here, initially driven by anger and a need to reclaim what had been taken from him. But now he found himself standing in the middle of someone's pain, a kind of pain he had never truly understood until now. Emma's voice broke through the heavy silence. "How much is the medicine?" she asked, looking up at Nathan with pleading eyes. The answer came quickly, though it was clear Emma was afraid to ask for more than she needed. Without a word, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He counted the bills swiftly, his movements smooth and practiced. But this time, his actions felt different, less like a transaction and more like an obligation. He handed the money to Emma, who took it with trembling hands, her face lighting up with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much." Nathan nodded stiffly, his mind racing as he took in the scene before him. He could have walked away. He had nothing to gain from helping these strangers, but something was holding him there, something that made him feel uncomfortable. It was as if a door had opened, and for the first time in his life, Nathan Carter was seeing the world through someone else's eyes. Emma's gratitude lingered in the air, filling the room with a warmth that Nathan couldn't quite place. He felt out of place, standing in this small, dimly lit apartment, the echoes of his wealthy, high-powered life so far removed from this reality. But for once, he didn't want to run away from it. For once, he didn't want to dismiss it as something irrelevant. "Is there anything else I can do?" Nathan found himself asking. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, was now quiet, unsure. Emma blinked in surprise. "Food," she whispered, almost embarrassed by the request. We haven't eaten in a couple of days." Nathan's jaw tightened as he looked at the girl, her thin frame barely more than skin and bones, her face etched with worry. His initial instinct was to leave, to dismiss this as someone else's problem. But as he stood there, watching her, he couldn't bring himself to walk away. For the first time in years, Nathan Carter realized just how much he had taken for granted, how far removed he had become from the struggles of ordinary people. He nodded silently and turned to leave, not knowing exactly why he was doing it, only that it was something he needed to do. When Nathan returned, it wasn't just with a bag of food, it was with bags of groceries, enough to fill the small kitchen. He placed them on the counter, his movements stiff, but purposeful. Emma's eyes widened as she looked at the bags, her mouth hanging slightly open in disbelief. "You didn't have to," she murmured, still in shock. "You've already done so much." "Don't mention it," Nathan replied gruffly, the edge of his voice softening just slightly. "No one should go without food." As Emma unpacked the bags, Nathan lingered in the background, watching as she sorted through the items. It was a strange feeling, this act of giving, of doing something for someone else. It wasn't that Nathan had never donated money or supported charity before. But this was different. This wasn't a faceless transaction. This was real. This was human. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan felt as if he was actually part of something that mattered. Weeks passed, and Nathan continued visiting Emma and Sarah, bringing groceries, ensuring Sarah's medication was covered, and spending time in their cramped, run-down apartment. With each visit, Nathan's connection to them deepened. Emma's initial fear of him softened into trust, and Sarah's health gradually improved. But more than just physical help, Nathan found himself changed by the simplicity of their lives, the selflessness they had for each other, and the quiet strength they carried despite their hardship. Nathan began to see the emptiness in his own life. For all his wealth and power, he had no real connections, no one who needed him the way Emma and Sarah did. He had spent so much of his life chasing money and status that he had neglected the very things that truly mattered: love, family, compassion. One day, sitting in their apartment, Nathan turned to Emma, his voice softer than usual. "You've shown me something I didn't know I needed," he said. "Life isn't about what you have. It's about who you have. And you've taught me that." Emma looked at him, her brown eyes wide with confusion. "But you have everything. Mr. Carter, why would you care about us?" Nathan took a deep breath. "Because you have something I lost a long time ago: love. Emma, a family who means everything to you. I've spent my whole life focused on the wrong things. But you've shown me there's more to life than wealth." Emma smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. Nathan's heart felt heavy with guilt and determination. He couldn't let them continue living this way. Not after everything they had shown him. "I want to help," he said. "You don't have to live here anymore. You can live with me. My house is too big for just me." After much consideration, Sarah and Emma agreed. They left their small apartment behind and moved into Nathan's mansion. The change was overwhelming at first, but as the days passed, Emma and Sarah began to adjust to their new life. Nathan, too, felt a shift within himself. He had been offering them help, but in return, they had given him something far more valuable: a sense of purpose. As Sarah regained her health and Emma smiled more freely, Nathan realized that his true wealth wasn't in money or power. It was in the love and connection he had built with them. Together, they began to rebuild their lives, and Nathan found himself living a life he had once believed impossible, one filled with love, meaning, and compassion. In the end, Nathan Carter had found the true essence of life, not in what you have, but in what you give, and in that, he had been given a second chance. Thank you for watching this powerful story on Empathy Stories. We hope it moved you as much as it did us. Sometimes, life has a way of teaching us lessons we never expected, and this tale is a perfect example. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us all of our shared humanity. See you in the next video.